So now we continue to stop.
Okay. Okay, so now we have autonomy basis, that is the basis that is linked with the process X, but we can decompose beta 1, that is this guy, in this base. Okay, so we'll decompose beta 1 into the base. So we have beta 1 would be a sum of some coefficient and the function phi L. Okay? So now what we have, if we compute if I have composed E of the expected value of y times x, okay, so we see that if I multiply y by x, okay, and I take the expectation, x is center, so this will be 0, this will be 0 by independence, so I determine only what we have is the product scalar between x1 and beta 1 times x1, and that will just be, by definition, gamma beta. Okay. So this is just gamma for the function beta in H. Okay. So now we are interested in the variance of the expected value of y knowing x. Okay, so we saw that it's just this variance. So this is just the variance of the product scalar between x1 and b1. Since x1 is centered, this is just the expected value of x1, the product scalar x1 b1 times the product scalar of x1 b1. Okay, and so that is just by definition the product scalar between beta and gamma beta. Okay. So if you are so now if you decompose beta in the base and you do all the computation, what will you get? You will have that this variance. Okay. So now you use your decomposition in the base, and what you get would only be the sum, the infinite sum of lambda L gamma L squared. Okay, so now we want to estimate this thing. So what is unknown here? So here we have two problems. We have so we have two problems here. Is that the gamma L square are unknown because they are the coefficient of the beta. Okay, and the second problem here is that I have an infinite sum. Okay, so this is impossible to compute in practice. Okay, so this guy we will have to stop our sum at some level that I did by m for the moment, and this one we want to replace it by some estimator of the gamma. Okay, so first of all we'll find some nice estimator of the gamma. So the natural estimator of the gamma is given by, I will just keep the details, but it's not too difficult to see that we can estimate gamma by gamma hat that would be so it will be 1 over lambda L, 1 over N, okay. So now replacing gamma by the estimation, and I truncate my sum to a certain level m. Okay, I'll get an estimator. So I will say that I have Vm hat, that is an estimator of the variance of the conditional expectation, that would be given by the sum for L equals 1 to m. Okay, I have what do I have? So here I have a lambda L here, okay, but here I have a lambda L square at the denominator, so I will just have 1 over lambda L. Okay. So I use a classical U statistic here. So we can remove the square term. It doesn't change anything, but it would be more easier afterward for the central limit theorem. Okay, so this is our estimator. And what we can prove okay, so we need some assumptions. So the assumption of my theorem are so my first assumption is that so yes.
Do we not need to estimate these lambda L's and the
So this is a really good thing. The thing is that in my framework, I can I am assuming that I'm knowing the kernel of decomposition of my process here. Okay, it's a framework of computer code experiment, so I can choose the law of the inputs. Okay, so this is a limitation of my of this part of this technique of estimation, is that if you have a general process, you don't know exactly the kernel of decomposition, so you have to estimate it and so on, and that would give you. So you first need to estimate the lambda and the phi, and then maybe use plug-in estimator, but you have to control the rate of convergence. The term would be much more complicated. Okay, but I agree with you. Okay, so here I am assuming that I know exactly the lambda and the phi. Okay, if I don't know them, I have to estimate them, and then as you mentioned yesterday, the estimation of phi could be very difficult. Okay, so this work, but I have a strong assumption, and there's not much processes where we know exactly the kernel of decomposition. There's the Brownian and some other ones linked to the Brownian, but there's no so many. So I agree with you. This is a strong limitation of this method. Okay. But if you don't know that, you just use the pick and freeze method and you have an estimation. Okay, so this is just an example to show that sometimes if you know things about your model, you can do another method. Okay, that maybe can be better in some case, but maybe not. Okay, what is good with the pick and freeze method that it works in all cases. You don't know to know anything about the law of the inputs. Okay. So the first assumption that I need in my theorem is that so these are the random variables that are appearing in the cardinal decomposition of X, and xi L. Is the random part of my process X, okay? We know that they are uncorrelated, centered with variance 1. So here, what I want is that they have moment of order 4, and in addition, I want that the moment or the fourth moment are uniformly bounded. Okay. So, for example, if your Gaussian if your process is Gaussian, the XCL will be N01 random variable. So this assumption will be automatically fulfilled. Okay. So now my second assumption is how do I choose the way I will. Here I have an infinite sum, so I cut this infinite sum, so I have to cut it at a certain level. So here, okay. So I have to explain at what level I cut my infinite sum. So this level obviously should depend on n. It will go to infinity when n goes to infinity, and here we give some assumption on how it should go to infinity. Okay. So you could take any m of the form square root of n times a certain function hn, and hn should satisfy that hn goes to 0, while n goes to infinity, and alpha n hn goes to infinity for any positive alpha. So for example, you can think so if you take hn equal 1 over log n, it's okay. Okay, so you can think about mn. So the good way of thinking is that you can take mn equal square root of n. If you take this level of truncature, it will work. Okay. Okay, and now I assume that the lambda L, okay, singular value lambda L, they are bounded by some constants. We assume that there exists some constant delta larger than 1, such that the singular value lambda L are bounded by C times lambda minus delta. Okay, so just a word about this assumption. It's not too strong because this is not a very strong assumption, because we know that the infinite sum of the lambda L is finite. Okay, so for example, if you take so they are smaller than 1 over L, because we know that the sum of the 1 over lambda L is not a convergent series. Okay, so saying that I have something that is 1 plus, I'm just saying that I have 1 plus something here. Okay, with that larger than 1. So it's almost equivalent. It's not equivalent. I agree with the fact that the series converges, but it's not that far. Okay. So this assumption is not very difficult to fulfill. Okay, and if you have those assumptions, what we can show is that the square root of n of Vmx minus the variance this one converges in law to some Gaussian and the limited variance is 4 times the variance of y times x beta. Okay. Okay, so the proof is quite long and difficult. I think I will need 2 or 3 hours if I want to explain the proof here on the blackboard. Okay, so if you don't believe me, I can give you the paper where it's written. Okay. So what is happening now? For example, here we have 2 methods for estimating S1. Okay. So, which one is the better one? Okay. So, in general, there is no answer to this question. Okay. So we can build example where the pick and freeze method will be better than this method, and other example where the kernel of the decomposition will lead to better estimate. Okay, what's the meaning of better estimate? They both have the same rate of convergence, so well, we can say that one method is better than the other one if the limiting variance we have here is smaller for a method than for the other one. Okay, so so what can we say about the peak freeze? So what is good is that the first thing we can say that the peak freeze method is good because it is always working. Okay, there's no surprise in the method. We know exactly what will happen. Okay. So, it was mentioned in the question, the drawback of the method I present here, say we need to know okay, so if you don't know them, what you can do, you can estimate them. In our setting, the estimation of phi L and lambda L may be, well, phi L can be difficult, but we don't need to compute the code to estimate lambda L phi L. Okay, it's something that we can do offline because it just depends on the distribution of the inputs. Okay. So this method will be better when it will be better. We can think that this method is better because we use information of the model. Okay. So this is true, but not always. Why? Because when we decompose here the function betas that are unknown, okay, what can happen? The phi L we have there, this guy, phi L is the good way to represent my processes X1. Okay? But maybe it is not good to represent the beta that I don't know. Okay? We can imagine that we can imagine that the gamma L will be equal to 0 for all small l, okay? And since here I made a truncation here at level m, I will have no information, okay? And in that case, this method is not good because I'm using a base that is good for x, but maybe it's not good for the beta, okay? So the point is that if the beta are nicely represented in my base phi L, this method will be much better than pick and freeze method. If not, it will be catastrophic. Okay? Okay, so in the paper we made some comparison of the two methods. We made some simulation and explain all those kind of things. Okay, so do you have any questions? No? If you don't have question, I will, so if you remember, for the moment we only spoke about a computer code that were valued in R, okay? So now I will present what we can do if the output is in R2 or R3 in some vectorial space, finite dimension vectorial space to start with, okay? Okay, so it will be yes.
Sorry, just an afterthought.
Yeah.
In this result,
Yes.
this choice of n that you have, see, this has no dependence on how fast or how slow these lambda n's decay. So, I mean, for example, if lambda n's have a polynomial decay, or if lambda n's have an exponential decay,
Well, I mean, I think that if you know that they are decreasing more rapidly, you can choose. But with this shows I mean it will also work. Okay.
Okay. So the choice of m is not dependent on.
No, but in some sense, I need to have this decay. Okay. But yes, it does not depend on the decay. But I'm not saying that I found the optimal choice of m. Okay. So I think if you want to find the optimal choice of m, then you have to consider the rate of decay. Okay. I think because here we have in some sense we are late. It's a limit theorem. Okay, it's an asymptotic result. But if you want to be optimal for a fixed n, okay, then you will have to use I think. Okay, so now we want to define some indices when our code is dimensioned. Okay, so it's on same here. You will have how do you work that? Okay, so you have a function that is valued in RD. So the first ID okay, here I have D functions that are valued in R. So the first idea I can say, okay, I can compute the D first subword index for each of the functions. Okay. So I want to. So this would be a very bad idea. Okay. So maybe I will try to explain this. This is not a good idea because here you don't take into account more or less the correlation of the output, or and in addition, if you find that S1 is less of S2 for the first output, and but S1 of F4 is larger than S2 of F4. What can you say? Would you say that X1 is more influent than X2 or not? Okay, so, okay. That could be difficult to interpret. And the problem in terms of simulation here is that you will have to compute, to estimate, for example, here D indices. Okay, so it will multiply the number of computational call of your code by D or 2D. Okay, and if the code is expensive, that will cost you a lot. Okay. In addition, I will give you. We'll do some example together to see that it would be difficult to interpret than this. Okay, so maybe we can start by a small example. Imagine that okay, you just take this very simple example. Okay, and here okay, so we can compute the subword indices. So if I compute, so you can do the computation. So if you do that, you will find that. So this is the S1 of F1. If you compute S2 of F1, S2 of F1, that would be 1/3. Okay, so F1 is this function. Okay, F2 is this function. So it's here. It's obvious here in the formula that S1 is complicated. It's symmetric in X1 and X2. Okay, so it's obvious that we should have 1/3, 1/3. Okay, and if you compute S1 of F2 and S2 of F2, so here you will find S1 of F2, so that will be okay. So for example, here what we saw in this example is that we can see different things. if you take a look of the ratio, for example, if you do the ratio here and here, what you see, there's something a little bit strange, is that this does not depend on B, for example, and maybe we can do something else, for example. We see that if you do the ratio, we saw that for A is larger than 1, the ratio is larger or equal to 1, okay? Because it's just A squared for the second one and 1 for the first one. So that should mean that x1 okay, so it seems that x1 has more influence if A is larger than 1, okay? And that is more or less what we can, okay, so if you take a look at the function, we saw that this is completely symmetrical with respect to x1 and x2. So for the first output, x1 and x2 has the same influence, okay? And here what we see that if R is larger than 1 in absolute value, this guy has a variance that is greater than this one. So, okay, it seems natural to say that x1 should have more influence than x2 if R is larger than 1, okay? This part is symmetrical in x1 and x2, okay? But take a look now. If you consider now you can, for example, consider the norm of your vector, okay? That is the norm square of your vector, okay? You do that and you compute now so I don't want to do the computation on the blackboard, but it's really not difficult to do the computation, okay? And you say, okay, and you look at when S1, for example, when the S1 of the norm is larger than S2 of the norm, okay? If you do that, what you will find, so this is equivalent of A minus 1 So this is just computation, and you will find this equivalence, okay? And you see that this is not the same set as absolute value of A larger than 1, okay? So this is a little bit disturbing, okay? Okay, so for several reasons, for the result of its interpretation that is not clear, and the fact that here we need a lot of computation to have a nice estimation of all these indices. We have to think a little bit of how we can define some nice index when y is in Rt. Okay. So for that, we will go back to we go back to Hövding decomposition of the variance. Okay, so if you remember what we did, okay, we said that y so again I'm writing in with only two variables. Okay, we had the fourth term. I don't want to write the fourth one. So we had that. Okay, this is true even if so this holds in RD. Okay. So there's no problem. I can take so now I can take the covariance matrix in both sides. Okay, so again we'll have that. So this is a matrix now. So this is okay. Okay, so here we have okay, everywhere here I have some square matrix of size d times t. Okay. So remember that when d was equal to 1, what we did, it was we divide both sides by the variance of y. Okay? Here, of course, we can not. So what we can do, we can say, okay. So what we can do, we can say we can multiply I can multiply by the variance of the matrix. Okay? In that case, okay, I will obtain the identity here. So maybe I will denote by or I can do that, but here I multiply on the left side, but since the product of matrix is non-commutative, it's not the same. So, or I can have something that is different. Okay, or I can multiply it on the right side. Okay, but I can do also something else. I can split my variance sigma into two parts and multiply it by, so I can, if I take, okay, I can multiply by sigma minus R on the right and sigma minus B on the left, or on the contrary, and so or I can have something else. That would be identity is sigma minus A okay? Or if I have two matrices for whom the product, so if I have AB, so and I also can, if I decompose sigma with the product of two matrices, I can multiply by A minus 1 on the right and on the left and B minus 1 on the left, and I have another decomposition. Okay? So here obviously I have a problem because so if you think of that, so you have an infinity way of choosing the decomposition here, or multiplying to get the identity on the left-hand side. Okay. So what should I do? Okay. So to answer this question, okay, and the point that is the problem is worse than that because you can do other things, okay? So okay, so this is okay, but so here I decided to multiply by in some sense by the inverse of this matrix. But what you can do, you can say, okay, I have a formula that is vectorial, and I can project it into R, and then do the methodology we did before. Okay. So for example, I can take M a matrix. I can multiply this equality by M, by any matrix, for example. So this is a matrix, okay. Okay, I multiply by M, and then I can, for example, project this into R by taking the trace of this matrix. So I can say that okay, and then I divide, and then you get 1 is equals, and that will give you another kind of index. Okay, so there's an infinity ways of defining indices. Okay, so first of all, we have to say what kind of property we want that our index has. Okay. Okay, so the first important property that we want we want a property of invariance with respect of the change of the basis of the output space, okay? That means that if you take an orthogonal matrix, okay, so you should take a look of y and you change y. So this is just to change the way you are looking of your output. Okay, so this is my output. Okay, I'm just doing rotation. This is I just change my output with an orthogonal transformation. Okay, but the influence of the input has not changed. It's just the way I'm seeing it. I'm just turning my head, but the output is the same. Okay, so the influence of x1 it should be the same. Okay, so you want that if you take a look of y or O times y, okay, but you want that S1 of y is equal to S1 of OY, okay? So if you impose that to your index, all of those index does not satisfy this property. Okay? They are not invariant with respect to orthogonal transformation of the output. Okay? You can do the computation, it would not work. Even the symmetrical one, even if you can think that if you put a 1/2 here and 1/2 here, it would be a good idea, but it does not work. Okay? So I can expand here, but we can find A and B such that the product is sigma for which it would work, but it would not be sigma minus A and sigma minus B. Okay? It would be something else. Maybe I would present that tomorrow, but I will present, I will build an index with that idea that works very well. Okay? So, okay. Okay, so okay, if trace of m sigma is not equals to 0, I define so I call that the m sensitivity measure of y with respect to xu by only the trace okay, so I denote by Cu the variance of the conditional expression of y knowing Xe for E in U. Okay? So this is just a definition of this index of an index. Okay. Okay, so property we directly have the sum of the index. So we have that 1 equals to Okay, so they sum to 1. Okay, so I just divided by trace of MCR, so you have 1 equals to those things. Okay. We obviously have that they are between 1 and 0. Okay, now what is happening if I compose so if you take O a linear operator, and what you see that is that SU of okay, if you multiply your output by your linear operator O, what you get, that will be just a okay, so you just we know that if you multiply a random vector by some matrix, we know that the covariance matrix is changing by O times the covariance matrix by O transpose. Okay, so we just get that. Okay, so you can see that since the trace is invariant by permutation of the matrices, this is just by definition the sensitivity index of F, but replacing the matrix M by the matrix O transpose MO. Okay? So now what we see? First thing we can see is that so we want to, what can we choose for M? So the first thing I can do is to say, okay, I'm choosing M equals to the identity matrix. Okay. In that case, what we see okay, so I define by so I will say that SUF it would be okay, and now if I take the identity matrix here, in that case see that SU of OF will be equal to SU of O transpose OF. So if O is orthogonal, we have that SU of OF is equal to SUF. Okay? And also we can see that if in addition, if I do a scaling of a function, it's easy to see that lambda not equal to 0. Okay. And in the addition, if you think a little bit, and if you take t equals 1 in all this formula, you exactly recover the classical Sobol indices. Okay? But for M equals to identity, we have a really nice generalization of the Sobol indices. Okay? So the question is now, can I take other matrix than the identity? Okay? So what I will prove that in some sense, M is the only choice possible. Okay? So now what we will see is that so identity is the only good choice for the matrix M. Okay? So we have a proposition that tells you us that if so M is so if you take a matrix M that is independent of M, of U and F, M has full rank, okay, and if you want that and this SUM is invariant by left composition of F by any isometry of RD, then the index you get with this matrix M is the same of the index that you obtain with the identity matrix. So you can choose without loss of rigidity that M is the identity matrix. Okay, so the proof of this result okay, so first thing, you can always write your matrix as the sum of a symmetric matrix and an antisymmetric matrix. Okay, so with okay, so you decompose your matrix as the sum of a symmetric matrix and an antisymmetric matrix. Okay. What we can see is that if we multiply it, so V is a covariance matrix, okay, so it's symmetric. a symmetric matrix. Okay, if you multiply a symmetric matrix by an antisymmetric matrix and you compute the trace of this matrix, you will obtain 0. Okay, so we can assume that M is symmetric because the antisymmetric part of M has no influence on the index. Okay? So that's the first point. Second point, since M now is a symmetric matrix, I can diagonalize M in orthogonal with an orthogonal matrix. Okay? So I diagonalize M. Okay, and I can do so M. I can write M as P D P transpose with a P transpose P equals to the identity, and D is diagonal. Okay. Okay, so now see if I write okay, so now this is invariant by symmetric permutation of cyclic permutation of the matrix here. So this I can say that is G P transpose CU P divided by the trace of. Okay, so this is just the SU of so this is just the d-sensitivity indices of the function PTF. Okay? Okay, but since here we want that is invariant by left composition by isometry, so now we can assume that our matrix M is diagonal. Okay? So we can assume okay, so now what we want to show that we are more than M that is diagonal. We want to show that M is all the singular value are equals. Okay. Okay, so we will prove that by contradiction. We assume We assume that there exist two diagonal elements, lambda 1 and lambda 2, that are different. Okay, so so it is enough to show that I have a contradiction in dimension 2. In that case, we have the general result. Okay, so I can assume now for that part that T equals to 2. Okay. Okay, so I'm constructing an example. So I assume that f is just the identity function. Okay. So in that case, okay, I will have sigma equals the identity, and okay, and Cu, C1, for example, would be the matrix 1, 0, 0. Okay, so now if you compute SUM of F, okay, so what would that be? It would be the trace of MCU divided by the trace of M sigma, okay? I remind that in that case here M is just lambda 1, lambda 2, and the diagonal and 0, 0, okay? So if you do that, what you get obviously is lambda 1 divided by lambda 1 plus lambda 2, okay? Okay, so but now if I take all the isometry that x3 to E1, E2. So E1, E2 is the canonical base of R2, okay? So I just take the isometry that is just changing by two vectors, okay? So if you do that, what you find, computing SUM of F, just have to replace the lambda 1 by lambda 2 in the numerator. Okay, so if you want that, your index is invariant by any orthogonal change of the basis. So this is not possible if lambda 1 is different of lambda 2. Okay. Okay, so now I know that M is lambda the identity. And now it's easy to check that replacing lambda the entity by the entity does not change anything on your index, okay? Because you will multiply by lambda the numerator and divide by lambda the denominator, that it will simplify, okay? Any questions? Okay, so maybe we can do an easy example. That would be Okay, so what is the matrix sigma here, the covariance matrix? So here you just have the variance of the first one, so it will be A squared. Here you have the variance of the second one, that will be 1, and since they are independent, I will get 0, 0 for the anti-diagonal terms, okay? So now I need to compute the variance of the expected value of y knowing x1. So what is the conditional expected value of y knowing x1? By just the vector ax1 0, okay? So the variance of this covariance matrix would just be A squared 0, 0, 0. Okay? And then I do the same thing with x2. So for x2 I will have, that would just be the vector 0, x2. So I will find zero, 0, 0, 1. Okay? So now I can compute my index. So what would be S1 of y? It's just the trace. It will just be the trace of this matrix. Okay, so divided by the trace of the covariance matrix, that is okay. Okay, so we see that they are easy to compute for simple example, and okay, so it's obvious here. So here we recover exactly what we thought, is that if the absolute value of I is larger than 1, okay, so x1 is more important than x2, okay? So now I'm going back to the first example I gave a few minutes ago. That was, so another example. It's the same example we saw a few minutes ago. It was y equals to okay, do you remember it? So now, what is sigma here? Okay, sigma is the covariance matrix of the output. So I will have something like 1 plus 1 plus 1, that will be 3. Here I think I will have a square plus b square plus 1. And then the covariance I will have, so that will be give me a. This is 0, this is 0, this is 0. A plus b, I think. So I think the covariance matrix should be something like that. Yes, I think that's true. Okay. So now I have to compute the expected value of y knowing x1. So what do I get? I get x1 here and a x1 here. So the covariance matrix of this one so it's 1 a square, and I think I have something like a here. Okay, and I do the same thing for the second variable. So now in x2, I just have x2 here and x2. Okay, so the variance is just 1, 1, 1, and 1. Okay? So I can again compute the sensitivity indices now. It's easy. So I just take the trace of this matrix. So it's 1 plus a squared divided by the trace. So 4 plus a squared plus b squared. And S2 would be 2 divided by the same thing. Okay. Yes, you have a question? And now it's easy to see that S1 here is larger than S2 if and only if a square is larger than 1. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so now we can proceed exactly as in dimension 1 and have the peak freak estimation of our indices. Okay, so I will have, since I have a trace, so I will have a sum for the diagonal elements, okay, from L equal 1 to D, okay, and then So here I can do. Okay. Another way of writing it is just say that it's just the trace of the CUN, or where CUN is the empirical estimator of the covariance matrix between Y and YU, and the same thing for the matrix sigma. Okay. And again, if we assume that we have a moment of order 4, we have a central limit theorem. The proof is exactly the same. Again, we will use the delta method, and everything works in the same way. Okay? So if you don't have question, maybe it's good. When I should at 1 I should have one?
Yeah, at 1.
At 1, okay, so you have 5 minutes to ask question. Okay. Yeah.
So, in the earlier example with this still the same y.
Yeah.
So we calculate this ratio S1 Fi by S2 Fi.
Yeah.
And we show that this ratio is bigger than equal to 1 if mod A is bigger
Yeah.
than equal to 1. And then we did something like calculating S1 of norm y squared.
Yes, because
yeah. So what I did not get was the connection between these two things.
The thing is that if I don't have a good way of defining an index in dimension D, I can do several things. I can define the indices component per component, or I can project my my y in R, so by taking the norm or by doing another thing, and I will get results that are completely different. Okay, that was the point of this. First, I take a component by component. I see that I have a condition that tells me when the first index, the first variable is inferred. I do another thing because so I project my y in R in some manner, and I get another result. So this is not satisfactory. So that was the motivation to say, okay, I have to think, and I have to try to do something that is coherent and that has some invariance and something like that. Okay.
Sir,
yeah.
We are taking trace, so we are ignoring the correlation structure.
Of what?
Taking for defining Sobol indices here.
Yes.
So correlation structure is ignored.
A correlation structure
Why?
is not ignored. In some sense, it's not ignored.
We are taking trace for defining all these indices.
We are sorry.
Sobol indices.
Yeah.
You are taking trace in numerator and denominator.
Yes, but in the denominator here. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Correlation structure is ignored. So there is loss in information somewhere.
Yeah, it's ignored, but if you think that for the numerator, think I am doing the conditional expectation. So the correlation structure can.
We are taking only traces.
Yes, I know that. Yeah.
So there is some improvement.
Yes, but your diagonal terms, when you first take the conditional expectation, they can change the diagonal part, and the change can take into account the correlation structure. I think. No, you are right. Yeah, I don't take into account the corrections. Yeah. There's a lot of information. Yeah. But I mean, in the suball indices, also you have a lot of information. Okay. So.
But I think that if we take the whole correction.
But this is a really good remark. Okay. And tomorrow, maybe I will present something that will take more into account the whole distribution. Okay. But that's but is you can do the same remark with the suball index. You just take into account the variance. Okay. And the variance, you lost a lot of information on the distribution. Okay. So then what we did, we tried to think, can we do something that take into account the whole distribution of my function? Okay. And that I will present that tomorrow. Okay. So I agree, I'm losing information, but that's more or less the only good generalization of one of the suball index in dimensions more than one. Okay. If you want to keep the